Hello everyone, welcome back to the OneTalk podcast. You're here with your host Ryan McCarthy. Today we are joined by Rosemary Gattuso. Rosemary completed the Master of Law with a focus on dispute resolution practices, including mediation and restorative justice. As a restorative engagement facilitator, she's on the panels for various Commonwealth agencies, including the Defence Force Ombudsman, the National Redress Scheme and the Stolen Generations Redress Scheme. Her extensive experience working in family court and her continued commitment to professional and personal development have placed Rosemary in a unique position to observe, learn, reflect and share. Her take on self-reflection and managing adversity through the eyes of trauma-informed family court mediator is the subject of her first book, currently in the process of being published. The book is called It's Not You, It's Me. In this book, a key factor is reflection. There's 31 reflection tasks within this book. They made me really eager to speak to Rosemary, pick her brain with all the expertise that she has, all the value that she has, all the knowledge that she has acquired over the years. And I really wanted to pick her brain around reflection specifically and the power of how reflection can bring positive impacts into our life. In this episode, we touched so much on reflection, personal development, personal growth, being a mediator, what comes with that, being a family mediator, some of the common trends. We talk about her book as well and the process of publishing the book. There's so much juicy content within this episode. I'm keen for you all to dive into it and check it out. But in other news, if you could please share this podcast around with a family member, a friend, if you could share it on your stories or even as a post, and even leave this podcast a rating. It just helps so much in terms of helping this podcast grow and get into a larger audience and help get this message out there. So if you could do that for me, it means a lot and it's much appreciated. But without further ado, let's welcome Rosemary. Welcome to the show, Rosemary. How are you?
Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. When you sent through your book and I read through it, it was so informative but highly valuable, and a lot of it is what I relate to from my own work and what I talk about in this podcast. Like, it's just so cool to see your reflections of life and then being able to implement that so people can have their own reflections in their life so they can begin personal development or to reach a higher self. So I just want to say welcome, and I appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. I just want to get more into understanding for myself, but also the people listening here. Like, what is your background? How did you get into the work that you do? What's some of the lessons you learned on the way, and what's some examples you can share? But I would like to start with, where did this all begin for you?
Well, I guess it really all began with my career, actually, or my desire to be a mediator. Somehow, deep down, I always wanted to be a mediator. It's not a very common profession, and not many people know what it is. But after, studying law, I realised that I'm not really meant to be a solicitor or any form of legal practitioner, but it introduced me to mediation. And I guess how that is relevant to what I'm proposing in my book is because being a mediator means being non-judgmental and being that independent third party. And I guess once I did start working as a mediator, I realised how important that part of my role is, and well, firstly, how different it is to the traditional sort of legal system, and maybe even the default approach that most people have, or many people have generally in life, because to sit with someone and be, show no judgment, not to take sides, and just listen and sit there and be with them, that can really make for really open conversation, and then have also challenging or tricky conversations. So, and I guess really in my work, I noticed that if my client and my clients felt that I was being judgmental, whether or not I was, or it was their perception is regardless, it would make moving forward quite difficult. Yep. So I guess that's where this idea of judgment and non-judgment really started to begin, and its importance, professionally. But then I guess I started seeing overlaps in personal life and friendships where there was judgment and when there wasn't judgment, how things could seem differently. So this idea really informed a lot of my approaches. And then I guess as a family mediator, I'm working with, they would normally be separating parents who are just looking for some assistance in reaching their agreements around who does what and when, their responsibilities. So just by way of background, I would meet with each parent. So it's not that I represent one or the other. I'm for both of them, non-judgmental, not taking sides for each one. And gosh, I just lost my train of thought.
What was, like, in saying that, like, what was some of the first moments, or what was the first moment, if you remember, that you wanted to take this work deeper and understand more of, especially about human behavior?
That's what I was getting to. Yeah, sorry. So it was my work with families then, and that really led me to explore the hidden meaning or the hidden layers behind behaviour, and why in one mediation room I would see one outcome, while in another mediation room with very similar sort of circumstances, I would get a completely different outcome. And so once I became quite aware of that, because I guess you do see trends, but it's not always predictable. Why is it that in this case things turn out going down, in a completely different path, whereas in another situation you reach an agreement, you reach I guess a future focus, or able to come up with an arrangement. So that's really sparked my curiosity. And then at the same time I started studying couples and family therapy.
Yep.
So, and that's where I really became aware of this, idea of working in a trauma-informed way, or just working in a way that really acknowledges and respects the fact that everyone comes to a situation with their own background. Some of it includes, quite, I'm going to say traumatic experiences, but it doesn't. It's just adverse experiences, and that has really shaped the way that they perceive and approach future circumstances. And that's that difference that I was seeing in mediation, in the mediation rooms. And so that's where I just started studying as much as I could, or whatever was available on, childhood trauma, childhood development, and just really anything trauma related.
Yeah, because especially in mediation, it sounds like, because I first learned this from reading the book The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He talks a lot about observation and being the watcher. I believe that probably translates into being a mediator. But do you feel like you had the realization of looking within from observing other people?
Definitely.
Yeah. Because
then I'd see, clients respond in a particular way, and I would be like, oh,
yeah,
it'd take me back a bit, and I'm thinking, oh, I think I'd probably do the same thing, or oh, gee, that's, and it just really got me thinking also about myself, because then I started to, in the same way that I could see the trends in clients and even others, then I'd see it in myself. So I guess that also helped me to really name what I was seeing as well.
Yeah. What was that like at first? Because I know when we have those realizations within, it can be a bit of a shock to ourselves and hard to actually accept it. Like, what was that first few steps like for you?
Then that's where it can be a shock.
Yeah.
And I guess that's also where the importance of non-judgment was really highlighted, because then, I might be thinking, okay, these are the trends that I've noticed, and put that together with non-judgment. That's really important. Okay. And then why am I being so judgmental about myself?
Yeah.
So then it's like, okay, non-judgment is really important. How do we, relay that non-judgment? And I guess what I found was that would be the difference internally between self-criticism and self-reflection.
Yeah.
And it's important to differentiate the two, because a lot of us, probably everyone in the world, is a very harsh critic of themselves. And sometimes we are more harsh than we should be at most of the time. It's important to be able to understand. I think acceptance plays a big part in that, because if we don't accept the things that we've done or what we're going through, it's kind of hard to implement things that will push us forward and help us grow in life as well.
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And I think this can be challenging when the default is that self-criticism, or even to overanalyze. Like I would classify myself as an overthinker.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who would say the same thing. And so that's where the challenge is. How can that trait of overthinking, how can that be beneficial rather than a hindrance?
And how have you found that within yourself? Like, what does make that beneficial for you specifically?
Well, is actually seeing it as a benefit and not a hindrance is the first thing. Because I might get into that mode of, I take too long to make decisions because I overthink things.
Yeah.
But maybe I consider all my options.
Yeah.
I'm quite cautious rather than, being so hard on myself. And I guess that is where you see the shift from self-criticism to self-reflection.
Yeah. And that's why reflection is so important, because like on a personal note, I went and saw a friend, it was probably last week, and I said to him, I want to improve my skills as a communicator, like for the podcast and just for life and public speaking and whatnot. And she goes, why do you feel the need to? Like, what's the deep belief behind that? And I sat with it and I realized that I'm just overthinking things and playing into them and trying to fix things that aren't broken. Like, yeah, there's always room for improvements for things in life, but I like this topic about overthinking because it relates with so many different situations of everyone's life as well. And with like, does meditation help? Does breath work help? Like, is there other things that you implement that are actionable?
Yeah, there's definitely practices. Any sort of mindfulness practice will help, sort of tone down that part of us that will go into that sort of emotional and reactive state, and really build up that part of us that can get into reflection zone.
Yeah, it's so true, because especially with meditation, I found that it really helps with just observation of the thoughts. And we're talking before the podcast about Eckhart Tolle.
Yep.
And he talks about becoming the watcher and detaching. And I think that's an important part, to be able to see your thoughts and ideas from a different perspective, so you're not so emotionally attached to them, to actually understand if they're serving you, trying to tell you something, or it's something you need to accept and move on from.
And I think it's, it can be helpful to sort of say, okay, let's change overthinking into self-reflection and be mindful of, the quality of our thoughts. But I guess what I was seeing coming from a strengths-based approach, because once I started studying and being a couples counsellor, I really took on the strengths-based approach, and even as a mediator, is that the trends that I was noticing in the rooms were really that our thoughts, feelings and actions could be categorised under what's wrong or what's strong. And so when we were overthinking, it would mainly be because we were focusing on what's wrong. And then going towards self-reflection, it would be more towards the strengths. Yeah.
And how powerful is that? Just being able to look at things of what's strong. Because I think as humans, we kind of are designed to just focus on what's wrong. Yep. And we forget to see the beauty that's already there, or to even look at the success that we already have within us. Yep. And we've already got the strength within us. And I love that you focus on strength-based things, because I feel like that can help people find motivation within themselves as well to become better or to improve their situation.
Yeah, because when we are focusing on the what's wrong in any scenario, it makes it harder to move forward and to even, make a decision or not make a decision, but maybe the decision in that scenario is don't do it.
Yeah.
There's too many risks involved. There's, you won't make it. They won't choose you, whatever the case may be. But then when we're focusing on the strengths, it makes it easier to have the courage to step forward.
Do you think that's how, especially with relationship counselling, do you find with people that focus on what's wrong, they became stuck in their situations and found it hard to move on?
It can be, because also I found that when you look at what's wrong, and look, when there are safety concerns, that's a completely different scenario, but I'm talking about when there are no safety concerns and pretty, sort of day-to-day scenarios, and I guess in my work when we're dealing with relationships, whether or not as a counsellor or a mediator, it's about sustaining healthy relationships. So when you do tend to focus on what's wrong in a scenario, I found that would also keep you in the past. And so then it's hard to look at future scenarios or make arrangements for the future, or even think about having a future focus when the wrongs of the past are still held in the present.
Yeah. Do you feel like there needs to be a balance of past, present, and future, or do you feel like we need to accept the past as it is, but just focus on the present moment, or have a vision of the future as well? What's your take on that?
Yeah, look, I think it is a tricky subject when looking at the past.
It's really broad.
Because it depends, we do, say if we're going through a major grief and loss, then it's natural to go look at the past. I guess it's more when it's not just a grief and loss process, it's I'm staying here.
Yeah.
That's where I guess there is a bit of a potential danger when it's about staying in that past scenario that stops you moving forward. So, and I guess it's an individual thing to kind of see, well, what will help me move one step forward into the present, so then I can make future plans.
And I love within your book too, especially because I think with the past and future, it all comes down to reflection as well. And you have 31 reflection tasks within your book. And I want to talk to you about the journey of finding the 31 different tasks and how that first began for yourself, because there is a lot of things within those, each particular ones that people can implement in different areas of their life, and it's just find the ones that do work best. But I just want to know more about yourself with those 31 reflection tasks.
Yeah, well, I guess the idea with the task is that there is a way to really implement the ideas that I'm proposing. So, and to make it user-friendly, so that it's based on, the reader's own experience and their scenarios and what's relevant for them. And so part of it, and I mean, some of them come from, I guess, the work that I've done as in strengths-based and as a counsellor. But I did go through all the tasks and did them myself, and I gave some of them to friends to do, to see, does this make sense? So then, even just giving the instructions, I don't want to make something too difficult to understand, but something that is quite simple. And I mean, I think it starts out with, simply just noticing thoughts on a particular situation and categorizing them under what's wrong or what's strong, just to see, are there any trends in the way I'm thinking about a particular situation.
I think, folks, especially, I love how you said that, because focus on what's wrong, what's strong. And because even with moments in my life and with people I've worked in my field, when these do start to focus on what's strong, I start to see them getting results. But it's also not neglecting the past and what's happened as well, because that's where, like you said, if loved ones passed away, that's where a lot of our memories are lied as well. But you like to touch on polar opposites within your book as well, especially what's wrong versus what's strong. You also touched on unsafe mode versus safe mode as well. Could you touch more onto that?
Yeah. So when I started doing a bit of self-guided study in trauma and neuroscience, I guess in the same way that I categorised thoughts, feelings and actions as being under what's wrong or what's strong, I found that from a biological perspective, I could categorise, come up with two categories, unsafe or safe. And I guess what I mean by that is, if you look at it, that from a very, very basic functioning of the brain, it's essentially to keep us safe and be on the lookout for threat. So, and if there are threats, then how can we get back to safety? So that was my very, very basic kind of way to sort of summarize or highlight where we might be from the brain's perspective in any given situation. And I found that the unsafe scenario could correspond with the what's wrong scenario. So I propose that the closer we are to what's wrong, or where our thoughts are could go under the heading of what's wrong, then that will bring us closer to the unsafe mode.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's so interesting. I've been loving this book because to relate with that, you also touched on handling adversity, like the trends for handling adversity, like what's wrong versus what's strong. And especially when people reflect on adversity through their life, it's just an important factor I want to touch on before we move on to the next subject, because I think reflection is something that we all need to do more.
Yeah, and it's as I've touched on, reflection is something that can all too easily move into overthinking and self-criticism.
Yeah.
So and then that is not as helpful, because we want to sit into reflection mode, or even it's not about being in reflection mode the whole time, because that's we're only human, but maybe be aware of, oh, hold on, I'm going back into the overthinking, in the self-criticism mode. How can I shift back? And also, what have I learned from that? Okay, I'm aware. I know these are my triggers, or this is what I can be looking out for or working on in the future. So, so it's less about staying in self-reflection mode, which would come under also what's strong mode in a situation, all the strengths, all those kind of positives in a particular situation, and also yourself. Yeah.
And in saying that, like, how long do you recommend to stay in reflection mode? Is it something you do at nighttime, something you do in the morning, or?
I guess I do have some specific practices to reflect on, whether or not it's written or meditations or just, kind of your thought process. But I guess it's more about the ability to catch ourselves out with less judgment, or in a non-judgmental way, to then say, oh, okay, I'm doing that. I'm going back into that criticism mode. I'm going back into judgment mode. I'm going back into that mode where I'm focusing on hurts of the past. It's not helping me. Okay, how do I move forward from there? How do I then move from what's wrong to the strengths in the situation? So it's more about catching. We can, there are specific self-reflection tasks that you can do, whether or not it's weekly or daily or whatever works for you. Even just sometimes meditation will help that reflective process, because it's going to build up the parts of the brain that will help us be less reactive and more in the responsive mode.
Do you think it's important to implement any gratitude with reflection as well?
Yeah, look, if gratitude works with you, then because that's also about. I do daily gratitude practices, because I've got a planner that has it, so it's easy for me to implement in my day, or to fit it in, because it's on the page every day. So, and I guess that's also about making you think about the events of the day. And every day doesn't have to be so amazing. It's just, we have day-to-day moments, and it could be, I'm grateful for the barista who made my coffee this morning. It could be something, because it just makes you think on that day and think, oh, what was really good about today? It doesn't have to be great. It's just something that, that really helped me today. That made my day, or I'm glad that, I had that interaction.
Yeah, and I think it's a key to make it simple as well, because I feel like so many people can try and idolize the big things and they forget about the little things that happen in their life. Like, I had this reflective moment just out of nowhere the other day, and I was just sitting in my kitchen. I'm like, how grateful am I to have a house? I was like, there's so many people that don't have a house, and it made me really just reflect out of nowhere and just be happy and grateful within that moment. So I loved how you touch on just the little things, even like drinking water, clean water, and it's just finding things that are strong as well, and going back to that.
And I think our society has a tendency to look towards what's wrong. You turn the TV on, you turn, social media, on anything you turn on, and we are either given images of what's wrong in the world, or it's also we can be given images that might lean us to highlight what's wrong in ourselves.
Yeah.
Because we see what other people have or what they're doing, and it highlights for us what we don't have or what we aren't doing.
Yeah.
So that's also that, and that's sort of not as obvious as we turn on the news and it's all this negative thing. It's also how we perceive and interact with the stimulus around us.
Because with the news, that's something I personally took away from my life, is being engaged in things that do focus on what's wrong and all the tragedies that happen. Because I felt like the more I consumed that content or the news or social media, I started to feel that way within myself as well. And you feel like with people, it's important to detox the things that are externally that might reflect that internally.
Yeah, it can be. I mean, if that helps for you to, I guess, realign yourself or help see less of what's wrong, then that's definitely helpful. And I guess one of the ideas that I propose is a screen detox or a social media detox, or whatever your medium is that can be a bit triggering.
Yeah.
And highlight what's wrong in you. I guess if we watch something and it makes us highlight what's wrong in us, okay, we can shut off that external factor, but it's also a clue for us as to, highlighting where we can focus or what would help us so that we aren't as affected or impacted by that external stimulus.
Yeah. And do you think the subconscious mind plays a big role in this? Because the subconscious mind is on automatic, like 90% of the time. So there are times we are conscious and the things we're implementing is getting programmed to our subconscious, and that's how we're on autopilot. Do you think it plays a big part in all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, I'm not that knowledgeable on, that area, but I guess what I have noticed is these, we look at what's happening, but it also highlights what's not happening. And I guess there's things that are implied, and that's how I see that working out for the individual, because I might see something and then it implies that, I need more or I don't have enough. So I guess that's where my focus would be there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because especially I believe, and you can give me your perspective too, the world is our mirror. So the things that we see can be a reflection of parts of ourselves. It's if you see something that triggers you, where does that relate with you? If you see something that motivates you, where does that relate with you? Yeah. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah. And I mean, the way that I sort of illustrate that is if we reach a situation in our life and we might get to a T intersection. And so if we go to the left, that will be the what's wrong path. And if we go to the right, that will be the what's strong path. Now, whichever path we choose, while we're walking along that path, we will receive more evidence to back up that what's wrong in that situation or what's strong, depending on which way we've walked. So, if you think, oh my gosh, this person's going to rip me off, then we've gone down the what's wrong path, and we are going to be receiving more evidence that really backs that up.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, he left out that, or she didn't do that, or, I need to be careful here.
That's so true, because when we have a belief in our mind, we unconsciously do things to try and seek that, to validate it. So we try and look for answers to make that true, because it's all evidence-based. So if you start focusing on what's strong and start finding evidence and building that towards yourself, you're going to see yourself embodying those beliefs, which will then change probably the trajectory of your own life.
That's right. And I guess the challenge is that for many people growing up, the what's wrong path was highlighted. So going to the what's strong or highlighting the strengths in a situation can be, I guess, against the default or against the norm. And so it takes more energy to actually go there, whereas it's easier. And biologically, we're programmed to be paranoid. We're programmed to be on the lookout for threat. So it's easier to take that path.
I've seen that especially with schools and growing up, because growing up plays a big part in our development. And I know with schools specifically, a lot of the time they can focus on what's wrong, like you failed, you need to improve, you need to do this, and you need to do that. Is there anything that young people, schools or parents can do to help their children focus on what's wrong? Because I know a lot of times we can try and focus on what's wrong to help them better themselves, which can be beneficial too in times. But is there any practices that parents could do specifically?
And I think that there's merit in that merit-based approach in schools, but it's also helpful to look at strengths as well. And I guess the example that really comes out to me about this is particularly in schools, is the fact that students nowadays receive a participation certificate if they participate in a competition or whatever the case is. And I know there has been a bit of discussion about that, because perhaps sort of our generation would have received merit-based certificates, and there was less focus on participation. But what I find is that the participation certificate is actually strengths-based, and it's going down the what's strong path for students. So it's saying, you put your name down and you participated when you didn't have to. You did it. And even if you had to, you still did it. So that's highlighting, good on you for trying, for participating. And it's also focuses on, the highlight is on the individual rather than the rest of the student body, because the merit base then says, how do I rank in relation to everyone else? And there is merit in that. I'm not saying there isn't, but if you look at it from maybe a self-esteem, sense of self perspective, if the measurement is always others, then what your goals are then going to be in comparison to what other people's goals are or what other people are doing, which we get enough of that in social media and just general outside. So I guess that's one example that I used to highlight actually focusing on the individual from a strengths-based perspective. So I think in schools that is quite helpful. I know a lot of people disagree with that.
Yeah, I love that perspective on it, because there is a bit of controversy around participation trophies. And I understand the people that say you shouldn't get them, but I believe people should receive participation trophies because, like you said, it's a reward for trying. And it's a reward for an attempt to try and do something that they might succeed in, or at least putting their name down. And that can motivate them to keep going or try again and try again. But if you knock someone down for trying, it's not going to really motivate them to want to push on and keep doing great things.
Or the motivation is external. It's because I want to be better than everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's, there's nothing wrong with that, because sometimes we do need external motivation, and that can help and drive us. But then at the same time, what does that then mean for our sense of self? That our sense of self and our self-esteem is really guided by what we're doing in comparison to another. Yeah. The spotlight's on them, whereas how do we shift the spotlight onto us from a strengths-based perspective?
Because we can, as humans, often externalize motivation. Like with that example, or we can use negative motivation, as in this person said I can't do this, so I'm going to use the energy to go and do it and prove them wrong. And do you think we need a balance of them all, or we just need to completely focus on self, or it depends?
I think it's about balance, because sometimes, we might procrastinate. I know I can be a big procrastinator, and then I might see, okay, I'm going to get, not that I'm going to get left behind, but sometimes seeing other people make decisions that are similar to what I'm sort of struggling with help me, it's not always strengths-based, I know, but if it's going to help me then move into action mode, I guess there's no harm in that. Yeah. We all do that.
Yeah.
I guess what I am pointing at is, well, is the spotlight on ourselves and what we want to do, or is the spotlight on the other? And sometimes it can be on the other, but I guess I'm proposing that we put it on ourselves as much as we can to then help nourish and grow ourselves.
So it's like identifying if it's actually our goal that we want to attain.
Yeah.
And then we use whatever motivation comes that aligns with our goals to push forward, as long as there is a balance between the external and internal motivation.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be both. That's
Yeah.
fine. It's just, I guess, when we focus on our own self, then that merely strengthens our confidence and our courage and our sense of self, so that we look less to others.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think it's important that you touched on identifying if it's actually your goal that you need motivation for. And because, like, on a personal note, like with the gym, when I first got into the gym, sometimes I was motivated, sometimes I wasn't. But my gym partner would then externalize that motivation for me to push and go when I didn't feel like it. But overall, it was to complete the goal that I had. I think, I just wanted to finish it off with that summary.
Yeah, because we're only human.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's, what's going to work for us and help us, because sometimes we do need external motivation, and that can be quite helpful.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, well, where it's detrimental, it might not even appear detrimental, but where our goals and our beliefs are always in comparison to another, that's where it's like, well, how can we reflect on this and to really isolate what our goals are and what our motivation is.
Yeah, like reflect on what your own beliefs are and your own values, because as we grow up through life, whether it's schools, parents, friends, we can adopt other people's beliefs and values, and then we might feel like we're not aligned with our purpose, or we're not aligned with our goals, or what we want in life. So yeah, just being able to reflect on what your own beliefs and values are and understand if they're actually true to you, or if they're adopted by someone else. Is that something
that's right? Yeah. And I guess I've also picked up that there's a lot to be learned from what's happening and what's not happening. So if we have a goal that we sort of identify with someone else, they're doing that, I want to do that, or I would like to achieve that, or I want to buy that, or whatever the case may be, I guess firstly we're putting the spotlight on someone else and not ourselves. Yeah. So that can be sort of a clue to where our sort of thoughts are going, but it's not it's not an indicator that it's bad, but that's just a clue. And then I guess the other thing is, when we have those thoughts, we've got the spotlight on another, and it's from a what's strong mode in that person. Yeah. And then the flip side is then it's highlighting what's wrong in ourselves, because we don't have that. It's our deficit that so we want to achieve, strength like the other person has a strength. So I guess what I'm proposing is that ways to then shift the spotlight onto ourselves from a strengths-based lens on ourselves, rather than the other and strengths-based for them.
Yeah, and talking about this, I feel like it would make, it's a really important trait for leadership skills as well, being strength-based. Because I know sometimes leaders can want to focus on people's weaknesses and then try and bring them up that way. I feel like to get the most effectiveness and also the most out of the team that you got is to focus on strengths.
Yes, that's so true. And I guess for me, one of my first experiences of being in a strengths-based organisation was my first job as a family mediator, because the manager there was extremely strengths-based. Yeah. And so what I found is that the more strengths-based she was with me, the more strengths-based I was with myself. Yeah. And you could see that in my own personal and professional development. And
that will build confidence as well, self-esteem, self-belief, and all these other positive things that will push you through life as well. Because when I first started working in mental health, my team leader was amazing at the time. He just constantly would tell you everything that's good about you, everything you're doing right. Like, obviously there will be times of reflection where you say you're not doing this, because that's important too for growth. But majority of the time is all about strengths. And I felt like that made me not just a better worker, but also a better person.
Yeah. And it's true. There's two, as I always view situations as there's two characters, the self and the other, which is everybody else. And so even in that situation where working in a strengths-based environment, then you feel more strengths-based, you receive strengths-based management, I guess, and you become more strengths-based about yourself, in relation to yourself, and also in relation to others with clients. And that's what I noticed, that the strengths-based approach I found beneficial for myself as a mediator there. But then I was also being implemented in the mediation room with clients, and I could see the benefits there.
Yeah. Do you feel like as a counsellor or as a mediator, when people first come to you, they may think that there's something wrong with them, there's something like... And
well, that's the default, because it's already in a sort of a deficit approach, because, you know, I go to someone because I've got a problem and I can't fix it myself. So it's already in the what's wrong. I can't do it. I need to go to another because they can help me fix it.
Do you find that it's a bit of a shock to them when you start focusing what's strong instead of what's wrong?
It can, because for many people, you know, they haven't had experience either with mediation or even with a counsellor, but particularly, you know, mediation, because it's sort of, you know, not a regular occurrence for most people. And so they can go in expecting one approach, expecting me to make a decision or expecting me to give them a solution, and then realise, well, actually, we're just as capable of making our own decisions. And my role is really just to facilitate their conversation.
Like everyone already has the answers or the success within them. It's just helping them move all the things out of the way to identify it.
Yeah. I mean, and I guess I also have, you know, talk about as long as there's no safety concerns. Yeah. And that's also not to say that clients who come in and aren't able to reach, you know, their own solution, because I guess everyone is at a different stage in their life. And me as a mediator facilitating or even a counsellor, that sort of dialogue, I've got to be guided by, I guess, the pace of all parties. So, you know, and I'd say, well, then the pace would be the pace of the slowest party, just to put it in that, you know, it's not very strengths-based, but because it's more about respecting where everyone is in the room and providing a space for everyone to feel comfortable or confident to move forward. And so if that means that there's no agreement, or that perhaps going through having a solicitor next to them or representing them can get a better outcome, or be more beneficial in that situation, then that's something that can be arranged. So
and coming back, because this will tie in with this, like coming back to the past and present talk we talked about before, and the future as well, and find the balance between all of them. Like, is there anything specifically that helps with identifying a vision and implementing practices that will get you there, but in a healthy way that you've seen?
Yes, I do have a reflection task on, you know, helping to focus on past and present. And I guess it's more about us being able to highlight where that situation is, how close it is to us. And I use kind of an externalization practice to externalize that situation and sort of gauge how close am I to that situation. You know, am I, you know, directly near it, or am I moving away from it and getting closer to the present or the past? So that would be kind of the first step. And then look at, okay, well, how close is this situation to me, and what could help me move further on, so that I am more in the present. And I guess, and I mean, I've got the full reflection task in my book, but I guess why I talk about past and present is because when I looked at what I call, say, survivors of adversity, which could be that, I mean, I looked at celebrities, I looked at people that I know or people that I've heard of. I found that even though there were people who were severely wronged or had really, you know, traumatic or challenging experiences, they were able to turn that into a triumph. And I guess what I thought was that I guess my hypothesis was that they were able to detach from that situation and look more to the present and future about, okay, well, this happened. How can I then step into the next step? And from a strengths-based perspective as well. So rather than sitting in, I can't believe this happened to me, this stuff always happened to me, I'm never going to succeed, I'm not, it was more about, okay, drawing a line in the sand and saying, well, what are my goals and what do I want to achieve?
That's so true. I know, especially with myself and a lot of the listeners here would relate. It's just a lot of big turning point in our lives is when we draw that line in the sand and we start focusing in the other direction.
And it's easy to say.
Yeah, it's easy to say.
And harder to actually implement. And, sometimes it's a matter of needing time for, like, I guess that the standard sort of, not standard, but the grief and loss process will allow for that process. But it's more about, well, it's been, 5 years, it's been 10 or whatever the case may be, and why am I still focusing on this, past? And I guess and sometimes we don't realise that's the thing, because when terrible things happen, it can be hard to detach from them. Yeah. But I guess what I noticed, in myself, in my clients, in even kind of celebrities that I sort of looked at their lives and what they did, is that they really had a future focus about things. And even like one example that I use in my book is Turia Pitt, who was caught in a grass fire. And so she had to have so many surgeries and things to recover from terrible, terrible burns and to be even able to walk, and she did so. And I guess through all those struggles and challenges, my hypothesis is that she had a future focus on, I do want to walk again. That's quite a significant thing, but for me it highlighted the importance and impact of having those kinds of goals, or look, even just focusing on the future. Okay, there will be, something else.
Yeah, because it is a journey. And like you said, it can happen a year, 3 years, 10 years. And I think a lot of the time we forget we're human sometimes, and we try and make things so perfect that we forget that, things take time, it's a journey, and we have to take the steps to get there as well. And there will be trials and tribulations on the way. Like even for myself, probably took about 2 years to get to a point where I was more strength-based. That doesn't mean now I don't have moments where I think about what's wrong. It's just finding ways to snap out of that and draw that line in the sand again and just bring your focus back to what you know.
Because it's not, like, it'll be impossible to kind of stay in that strengths-based mode all the time and to focus on ourselves and not worry about others or other situations. It's more about that awareness of, hey, I'm going down there, or I went down there again. Yeah. So that's okay. Now, how can I, use that to move forward, or use that in future scenarios? Yeah,
and I want to finish this what's wrong versus what's strong part from a quote from your book, actually. I read this quote from your book. No, I just thought it was amazing. I want to read it out. It's a few sentences, so bear with me. But you said at the end of chapter 1, you said, the characteristics of the lacking were words of judgment that lean towards what's wrong. If we apply the idea that there are valuable learnings to be had when we explore opposites, what's not happening, the opposite of lacking would then logically look to the words of non-judgment that lean towards what's strong. When I read that, it was just like a light bulb moment for me. And I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's where using opposites can really help out and guide our reflection, because if I'm focusing on what's wrong, then what am I not focusing on? Or if I'm focusing on the strengths, then obviously I'm not focusing on the weaknesses or what's wrong in a situation, and that can be helpful.
Yeah, 100%. And with your book, like what was the motivation in even starting this book? Because I know you've had a lot of experience in the field. Was it you had all this information and knowledge and you just wanted to share it with the world? Like what was the motivation?
Well, look, I started seeing trends in, in managing adversity. And I mean, I wouldn't have called it that. It's just I noticed something's happening in one room and in other sessions completely different. And then it became almost predictable because where the trend was to focus on what's wrong, then I kind of thought, well, this is going to be a little bit more challenging than where they're focusing on what's strong. And so I guess there's a couple of I guess, inspirations for that. But I had been writing for probably 10 years, writing stories. And so when I guess I noticed these trends, I mean, there's one story as to how it became a tool, but then one story as to how it became a book. So, but to become a book, I was writing stories about people who were actually living these what's wrong and what's strong approach. And so I wrote a book, and at the end of that story, I had a chapter that was all this kind of strengths-based and what's wrong analysis of the main character. And as part of that journey, I realised that if I'm going to write a book, I can't have fiction and non-fiction in the one. And so after some guidance from some editors and, entering a writer's competition, which obviously I didn't win, it inspired me to rewrite the book as a complete sort of self-help book. So that final chapter then became a complete book.
Yeah. Because I love books, audio books mainly, but I do read physical copies. I do believe personally this is one of the best reflection books that I've read. I'm going to recommend this to people because especially with 31 different tasks and then all the value and information jammed in between all that, it's unreal.
That's great.
Yeah.
Because I guess I find that growing up, I did have a different perspective or a different way of seeing things to everyone else. And that was a little bit challenging because sometimes it was harder for me to learn things, concepts in the sort of traditional way. But then at the same time, I guess it showed me another way of learning. And so I tried to really implement that in the way that the chapters are set out and the reflection task to really put in practice what I'm proposing.
And that just goes back to focus on your own strengths, like find out a way that you can learn. Because with myself, I couldn't learn from like the traditional educational system. Like I couldn't learn by sitting down doing one thing. Like I'm a kinesthetic learner and I like to learn by multitasking. So if you go into my Audible, I've got like 3 different books going on at once.
Yep.
But for me, that's the way I learn. And it's just being able to identify what your strengths are there.
Yeah. And it's good that you mentioned the audiobook because I've also recorded the audiobook because
Awesome.
Personally I rely on audiobooks because I'm a terrible reader. So I mean that's really not strengths based, but I'm better at listening.
Yeah.
so I did record the audiobook as well because I know that I would not have read not even half or most of the books that I have if it wasn't for the audio version.
Yeah, I'm the same. I love audio books. I find they're just more easily digestible, and it also helps with time as well. You can listen to it while you're driving, while you're cleaning, mowing the lawn, like
That's
whatever.
Right.
Yeah. How did you know when the book was finished? Like, how did you know, like, at the end of it, you're like, this is it?
Well, I did have a lot of support because, as I said, I entered the Hay House Writers Competition, and I mean I didn't win that, but then through that I got linked in with some editors who would help me, sort of fine tune where I was at and where I could go moving forward. So I always had good sort of professional support around me to sort of guide where I'm at and if there was anything else that could be included or in my case, I had too much.
Yeah.
So
And that just shows the importance of having the support network around you, like a team around you that you can go to and get their opinion on, get their perspectives on. Because I think too many people can try and do things by themselves and try and focus in on it. But I find that when you have people around you, you're able to see different perspectives. That's why like counsellors are awesome, because they're able to see things from a different box and ask good questions too.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And particularly because I'm self-publishing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I started off with a traditional publisher, then went to assisted self-publishing, and then went to fully self-publishing. So that's another story. But what I found is that traditional publishing really focuses on what's wrong in the writer, and what their work is. So that was huge for me to come to that realization. And then I think also traditional publishing industry really doesn't acknowledge the role of the writer and because my book, that's my now I see it as my property.
Yeah,
it's my intellectual property. So if I own a house, then I need to get repairs done to it. I might get a few quotes and make sure that the people that come onto my house are people who I feel confident with.
Yeah.
But I felt that in the writing industry, it was just, well, you're a first-time writer, take whatever you're given and that's it. Take it or leave it. And if you don't like it, too bad, because, basically you've signed a contract with us. So it's whatever we want to do with your book. And I thought, gee, that's really not strengths-based. And so I'm so glad when that fell through, because then it really gave me more ownership.
Yeah.
And then I linked in with some really helpful professionals who were able to give me some guidance.
That's amazing, and that's inspiring within itself to hear that, because you stuck with what truly aligns with you. Like, I'm not sure if you know who David Goggins is.
No, I don't.
So David Goggins, he published a book called Can't Hurt Me. And he's basically this dude who had a lot of trials and tribulations, went to Navy SEALs against all odds, trained in Navy SEALs, and after that became a marathon runner. Like, his life's incredible. But when he first wrote his book, publishers said to basically chuck the book back at him, said but they don't want it, or they're offering him like crazy contracts. Then eventually he self-published it, and it became like one of the best-selling books ever. And it just shows the power of, if you stick to your guns, you have a team around you, and you stay with things that truly align with you and strengths-based as well. Yeah. Like, things can really work out in a good way for you.
Yeah, I think so. And that was quite evident in my publishing journey, because I started it thinking, I'm a first-time writer, I've got no experience, and I don't know if my book is any good.
Yeah.
And then, and then it sort of helped me move forward to see the strengths and really have faith in the concepts that I'm proposing, and want to actually do it on my own. I mean, when I started, there was no way I would even anticipate being a self-publishing, and now I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, and like someone like myself who's obsessed with self-improvement and self-improvement books, like, I'm definitely gonna recommend this book to people that I know that will benefit from it, because I think it's one of the best reflection books out there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no dramas. Awesome. Do you have any final words? Like, how will people find your book when it's released? How can people connect with you?
Yeah, well, probably the easiest way is to connect with me either on Instagram, Facebook, or even LinkedIn.
Yep.
And or on my website you can subscribe and to get updates. So I'm hoping to launch by end of winter or early spring. So I'm really at that final stage is printing. So
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it. But I'll link all that in as well in the bio of this episode. So if you're listening, jump in the bio. You'll find your LinkedIn, Instagram, etc. Check out the book. Can't wait for it to come out and get a physical copy. But thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Cheers.